The Denver Broncos didn't make any moves at the NFL trade deadline. Should they have made some moves, or did they do the right thing? Well, we're going to dive deep into that in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
As the NFL trade deadline buzzer went off, the Denver Broncos stood pat and they didn't make a single move on the afternoon. Was that the right decision or the wrong decision? We'll dive deep into that in today's brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country. Special shout out to all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Do us a favor, subscribe or follow if you haven't done so already, so you never miss out on what's going on with the Denver Broncos every single day, all year long. The big events like the NFL trade deadline, free agency, the NFL draft, the scouting combine, we have you covered here, and obviously every day in season as well. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, my friend, Denver not making any moves here at the NFL trade deadline. I know this was a day in particular on Tuesday where many Broncos fans were anxiously waiting to see, does Denver sell anything? Do they buy anything? They didn't do either. And Sean Payton's kind of told us that was the plan. And now I think it's time to maybe start looking a little bit into, okay, well, if Sean Payton says they're not interested, I'm starting to think that, hey, like he's dead serious about that. And it seems like that was the vibe here overall on Tuesday at the NFL trade deadline. For the most part, a rather uneventful deadline outside of a couple of teams around the league making some moves.
Yeah, definitely some activity leading up to the deadline, but nothing including the Denver Broncos other than the fact that, like you said, they didn't trade guys that were rumored to be on the block like Jeudy, Courtland, Sutton. We obviously heard some rumors about Jeudy in recent days as well. And of course, there were other names thrown out there as, people thought maybe the Broncos are going to have a fire sale when they're sitting there at 1-5. Obviously, now they've won 2 games in a row heading into the bye week. Cody, they're staying put, and not only are they staying put, but man, they're going into the bye week with a pretty good feeling after beating the Kansas City Chiefs for the first time in 8+ years, which is crazy to say. It just goes to show, like, you just never know what's going to happen in the NFL. And I like that the Broncos stood firm. If they had a certain asking price for players, there's no reason to come off of that asking price, right? Like we've been talking about, other than Jeudy, every name that has come up for the Denver Broncos and trade deadline rumors, every single one of those guys is under contract for 2024. Now, we don't know exactly what that means in terms of will they actually be on the team in 2024, but the fact that they're under contract gives you leverage to stick to a price. You can always sell low in the offseason if you want. And at that point, you have more time to reevaluate and add more talent to the roster, as opposed to right now where kind of be scrambling, calling guys up from the practice squad, things like that, and sending a different message to your locker room, obviously. So I don't know, after seeing a little snippet of Club Dub on after Sunday's game against the Chiefs, Cody, I can't imagine the Broncos want to do anything to wreck that vibe.
Well, and look, you're going to get a lot of people saying, wow, they let one win against the Chiefs get to their heads. Like, no, this is Sean Payton's vision. And look, I said this as well, and I said it last week, and I've said it earlier this week. I've reiterated it 3 or 4 weeks ago. Sean Payton told us, he said, I've got a plan for every guy in this locker room. I've got a vision for this roster going into next season, and it involves the guys in this locker room. I'm not focused on anybody else's locker room right now. We're moving forward with the guys that we have here. And also, I think, you go back to things that Sean Payton has said in the offseason, how he's viewed this team. We'll dive deep into that a little bit later on here in the show, but he's seen a vision with this team. He's seen certain things happen, right? And the thing is, Sarah, we don't know what that vision is. Only Sean Payton knows. Broncos fans don't know what the vision is. As much as I think we would all, like as media, and I think as the fans would love to know what Sean Payton's vision is, that's not what he's going to let out there. So to me, I'm a little curious here. And look, I also think maybe we have to touch on this a little bit more as well. A lot of people are saying, well, Denver didn't make any moves. Technically, like they have made some roster changes. And look, to be honest with you, I think it has made them better. We talk about the defensive personnel changes that they've made. Jaquan McMillan emerging as the starting nickel for them, then moving on from Sayre Bassi. K'Wan Williams obviously not coming back this season. They found a really good player in him. More importantly, They traded away Randy Gregory, right? They let Frank Clark go, and they got Baron Browning back. And all of a sudden, we're seeing this team, and specifically on defense, we're seeing them play much better right now. We're seeing the offense actually embracing the run, though you and I did. I think it was very valid. Like, hey, tight end was an area that Denver probably should have looked at. And I know we'll talk about that coming up here in a moment. But Sean Payton has made some changes to this roster. And I think when we look at where Denver was at in the trade deadline, I'm curious for your thoughts on this. The trade deadline last year, obviously, right? Bradley Chubb gone. They go out and they get Jacob Martin, and they get Chase Edmonds in that Bradley Chubb trade there. This Broncos roster right now, Sayre, is much better than it was when they're at the deadline last year. And I think that also has a big reason why they're not making a lot of moves right here, why they didn't do it on Tuesday.
I think so too, but I think what may be even more, I don't know. I'd love to, if you get a chance to ask him about this, Cody, or maybe somebody else will. I wonder what Sean Payton feels about player progression. You mentioned Jaquan McMillan. You mentioned, a number of other guys on this team. Last year, that was arguably the biggest issue that I took with Nathaniel Hackett and his coaching staff. It didn't feel, especially offensively, didn't feel like anybody on the team was getting better. And that included, I guess you could say, defensively as well. When you look at kind of just the way things, I mean, the defense was playing well, but where was the progression? Who was the most improved player on the defense last year, right? I mean, and we could talk about Alex Singleton, a couple of other guys, but specifically offensively, there was really nobody that you could tangibly say up to the trade deadline, oh yeah, this guy, he's gotten better this season under this coaching staff. I think Sean Payton is confident in his coaching staff and their ability to elevate these guys on the roster, especially offensively, where we are seeing progression from Courtland Sutton. We're seeing, I mean, obviously Russell Wilson is playing much better this year than he was last year, although I know that's a whole layered debate for a lot of people. Offensive line, how about Lloyd Cushenberry playing much better than he has in recent years? I mean, Javonte Williams, we've talked a lot about his progression. So there's a lot of guys improving all over this roster, including defensively, where young pass rushers are stepping up. And we've seen other players like Jaquan McMillan, you mentioned it, PJ Locke playing very well in his first start of his NFL career. So there's player progression happening, which is what I think, and we'll talk about that later on as well, a little bit more in depth. But I think that's something to where it's not just that, okay, the Broncos are just okay with mediocrity. I think that's not the case at all. I think they're very much confident in the staff that they can develop the players that are currently on this roster. And that speaks volumes to what we saw. I mean, actions speak louder than words, right? So you stand pat at the trade deadline. It puts some faith behind, those things that you're doing, some feet to your faith, if you will.
And I think another thing as well, right? You talk about we've addressed this so many times on the show. Remember how we've said we just wish the Broncos, like covering this team, we just wish that they would stick with something rather than go through it part way, ripping it off, saying, all right, it's not working. I think Sean Payton's doing that. I think Sean Payton is going forward with it without being maybe overreactionary in the sense, because, hey, I think it would have been very easy when they were 1-4, 1-5 at a juncture, and they could have easily just been like, you know what? Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's change it. This isn't working. But Sean Payton is sticking with it. And I think that's something that this may be an unpopular opinion in the eyes of many people in Broncos country, but that might be something that the team has needed to do from this standpoint. And I understand all the previous 7 years have been lumped into this year as well. But realistically speaking, that's not how it works. It's not how this game works. 7 years ago has no merit on today's impact there. Though the outcome, I think, in the results that have happened have been the frustrating pain point. And that's a valid reason for fans here. But I think Sean Payton is going through with his vision. And I think we're going to find it out at some point. He's never going to tell us openly, because why would he want to get that out? Because they're going to give teams maybe some intel on maybe what moves he could make. But there's still, as we've seen, the NFL trade deadline obviously is coming past. Free agency will be coming up in March, new league year, and also the NFL draft. Like, there can be still a lot of changes that happen with this team in that juncture here. But right now, the team is moving forward with who they have right here on Broncos Country. We're going to ask the question, did the Broncos maybe miss out on any deals at the NFL trade deadline? We'll ponder and we'll debate on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos following the NFL trade deadline is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. And our partner at eBay Motors, they've teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or you're scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Well, let's take a look at Buffalo Bills rookie tight end Dalton Kincaid, who has stepped into a big role with Dawson Knox getting hurt. He's gotten hot with Josh Allen the past 2 weeks, scoring for the first time in his career in Week 8 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Kincaid gets a smash spot in a potential shootout against the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday night. Cincinnati, they've been better in coverage outside and against wideouts versus tight ends. Kincaid will once again come through for managers looking for a midseason pick-me-up at the position. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship. eBay Motors, they know a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same thing with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. You need brake kits, you need LED headlights, a roof rack for your vehicle, bumpers, whatever your baby needs. eBay Motors, they have it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Make sure you stay on top of whatever you need for your daily ride or die, your baby, every single day, especially with winter coming up. Make sure you have everything you need with eBay Motors. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Did the Denver Broncos make a mistake by not making any moves right at the NFL trade deadline in 2023, staying pat with the roster? It provides some confidence to the guys there, but from the outside looking in, were there any mistakes made? What do you think? Let us know in the comment section. And by the way, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. For those of you that choose to do so, you know you can find this podcast free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where you can watch Cody and I engage in the comment section with other members of Broncos Country as well. And we do like it when you sound off. Let us know. Do you think the Broncos should have made any trades? Do you feel like they missed out on some opportunities here, or do you like what they did, the decisions that they made to keep Jeudy, Courtland, Sutton, and everybody else that had been rumored to be on the market? Cody, I think that there are some arguments to be made that the Broncos did miss out on some potential trades here. And I know that obviously every team's situation and context is different, but when you look at this roster right now, if you're saying, okay, after what we saw against the Packers, the Chiefs, we had a couple of close calls against teams like the Jets, the Commanders, the Raiders. We feel pretty good about this team still. If you're going to go all in with the roster that you have, do you feel like, let's talk about this, should the Broncos have supplemented that by going after any sort of bargain deals? And when you look at the deals that were made across the league, do you think that there were any specific ones that maybe the Broncos should have been in on?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And you know, you and I brought this up, I think, on yesterday's episode of Locked On Broncos, talking about, okay, hey, if Denver's going to make a move, where could they? You and I, we had mentioned the tight end position. Obviously, in the Broncos win against the Chiefs, no tight end had a single receiving target on the afternoon, right? Which I guess could be a good thing, considering Denver ran the ball for 153 yards on the ground. And they got some stuff going with Courtland Sutton, Jeudy in the receiving game there, and even the tailbacks in the screen game. But you know, I think maybe looking at tight end might have been a difference maker. But for me, it's Sayre. I look at it as like, who are they going to trade for at tight end, right? We mentioned Taysom Hill. You know, did Denver have any interest, right? That's stuff that's not going to come out here. We're not going to find out if Denver picked up the phone and called New Orleans and said, hey, you know, you guys planning on moving Taysom? We just know that it was quiet for the Broncos here at the NFL trade deadline. Is there an option out there that maybe Denver could have traded for, right? I don't know if there were any guys out there. Are there any guys that are free agents that they could look at? I mean, maybe, but what's the point at this juncture, when you already have the guys that you have and you've kind of committed to that, and you traded away a tight end that you had earlier in training camp for some capital, which, you know, hey, look, an additional pick for Denver, that's great for them. They get a 6th versus a 7th round pick. So for me, I just look at it and say, okay, hey, maybe Denver not maybe looking at tight end could be something that we should talk about here. But part of me is wondering as well, which options out there were available, were the best options. I mean, the name that we brought up, I felt like would have been the best option, but was he actually available in the New Orleans Saints with Taysom Hill? I don't think that's the case here. But I did see on social media, right? I think the one big trade that we did see earlier was Montez Sweat to Chicago. And I was like, all right, hey, that's a big move. And then Washington traded Chase Young to the San Francisco 49ers for a 3rd round pick. And I know that I saw your tweet on Twitter talking about that for me, looking at it defensively, we also mentioned defensive line, right? Like, could he have been a good addition? Yeah. But I also think maybe we can play devil's advocate here. Would you have wanted the Broncos to spend a third round pick in this year's draft on him, especially with a potential extension for him that is coming up? And on top of that, you also have an extension coming up for Patrick Surtain. What about Justin Simmons? So a lot of other things, other moving pieces that maybe factor into it. But I mean, I think he would have been a good addition to Denver.
There certainly are a lot of good arguments for and against, I think, Cody, and you brought up some great points there. And I know our good friend Ryan Edwards, responded to my tweet on it and said, well, maybe the Broncos weren't lying when they said they really do like their young edge players. And I think that's another great point. Like
Yeah.
they should. And so that's it's more of a philosophy type of thing in terms of the roster building, right? I mean, you look at a guy like Chase Young, who was the defensive rookie of the year as recently as 2020. Guy's 24 years old, plays a premium position, and he was traded for a compensatory third round pick, and so that pick's going to end up being in the late 90s, early 100s, something like that. And I get that he's been injury prone. I get that he's in a contract year and things like that. I guess more so, maybe I just wish the Broncos were in a position to be able to have that kind of, what do you call it? It's kind of like disposable income, right? Where you're able to say, hey, let's just go buy that really quick. You know what? I feel like I want one of those. Like,
Yeah.
let's go get that. I kind of wish the Broncos were in a position to be able to do that, right? Because they, more so than anything, this is the tension and the frustration that I have with the Chase Young discussion. It's not even so much that I'm thinking, okay, the Broncos need to acquire Chase Young. He's the missing piece for a Super Bowl. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that a lot of times, you ever play Sudoku puzzles, Cody, where you got to do 9 numbers this way, 9, it's got to be 1 through 9 this way, 1 through 9 this way, and it can't be. I think a lot of times the fan base in Denver, they really, really struggle thinking that roster building is like, okay, I only have 5 or so numbers left on my Sudoku puzzle. I need to figure out what number goes here, and does it work for this line up here? They feel like, okay, the only way to improve the roster is to fill what are perceived to be holes, as opposed to just adding talented players to the mix. It's not a Sudoku puzzle to me. I think adding talent to this roster is something that the team needs more so than anything. I know a lot of people want to say, hey, we need those third round picks, the fourth round picks to bring in cost controlled players. You're telling me you would rather have Ioma Uwazurike than Chase Young in terms of the value that was given in that trade. That's what I'm saying. I would rather do the deal for Chase Young and say, hey, let's evaluate these 9 games that we've got and figure out if we want to re-sign him. You can always re-sign guys or sign them to new contracts with low year 1 cap hits. So I just think it's a philosophy type of thing, right? Where we're talking about, it's not just about the player that was traded. It's the fact that he's a young guy, a defensive rookie of the year, one of the NFL's leaders this season in pressures, which people don't realize. If they're acting like he's a bust out there, he's getting after the quarterback. So the tremendous value for the 49ers. And I feel like I just wish the Broncos could be in on deals like that.
I think that's a fair point too. And look, Broncos country, we want to hear from you. Do you feel like it was a mistake that maybe Denver didn't make any trades or get any of their guys away just so they could get picks? Do you feel like they missed out on maybe not being in that? Like, part of me still wondering, Sayre, was Denver ever in as buyers at some point? Sometimes this stuff gets out, and I think we'll just play the wait and see game here for it. But overall, I'm not sure where things stand here. But I think you make some great points. And we talk about roster building. I'm very curious to see how this team now, obviously the next portion where they can actually build and add to the roster is going to be an NFL free agency. I'm very, very curious to see what they do in March when the new league year rolls around too, because that's the next thing that's up for them here when we talk about maybe changing this roster or adding talent. As you said, does Sean Payton view it that way? I think that's a very, very interesting thing. So Broncos country, let us know if you're watching on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, your thoughts on that. But one thing we are going to talk about is the evaluation of this Broncos roster moving forward into the second half of the schedule. Where's the perception on maybe where Sean Payton sees this roster? Well, you're going to get that on today's brand new episode of the show. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Gametime app. And if you've ever had a frustrating ticket buying experience, well, Gametime helps alleviate all those issues that you may run into. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, the music, comedy, and theater events that are going on near you. And they also have Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And make sure you get tickets for your next event locally, whether it's going to the Broncos game on Monday Night Football in Buffalo. Gametime can get you there. They can put you in a seat that you want there. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You get to see the view from your seat before you even buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. So you want to see what vantage point you're going to have at any of the events. They have you covered with the view from that seat. That is a unique experience inside the Gametime app. They have all-in prices that show you your total up front, so you know that you're getting a great deal without any hidden fees, and you could buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. As we get into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, what is the evaluation of this roster moving forward? Real quick, thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So if you're a Broncos fan listening and watching this the first time, you got Broncos friends and family, send this podcast to them so they never miss out on what's actually going on with the team without the clickbait, with all that nonsense and skies falling talk. We like to keep things objective, never too high, never too low. We like to stay in the middle there, and we appreciate you so much for rocking with us here. Sayre, following the buzzer sounding at the NFL trade deadline with Denver standing pat, not doing anything here going forward, it seems like Sean Payton in this offense and the defense and George Payton, the personnel department, they're moving forward with the guys that they already have on the roster right now. And I think we go back to it as well. We did mention some of the changes they have made from a personnel standpoint, from a lineup standpoint, defensively. Schematically, they made a couple of adjustments on the defensive side, but for the most part, Sean Payton now has a chance to kind of see things going forward here. And Denver rattled off 2 big wins in a row, and one against Kansas City, who came into the NFL with the NFL's best record at that game, at that juncture. And they came away with a victory right before the bye week, setting up for a Monday Night Football showdown against the up-and-down Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. And look, Denver's got a real good chance to get some wins in the second half of the schedule if they play the way that they played against Kansas City. So for you, what are your thoughts, your interpretations on this roster moving forward?
Well, I think that first of all, we want to start on the offensive side of the ball, and really it revolves around, can you become more balanced, right? I think the Broncos are believing that they have talent at the wide receiver position. That's why they're not dumping Jerry Jeudy in a trade. That's why they're not dumping Courtland Sutton in a trade. You believe you've got talent at the top of that position. And I think I would agree with them, Cody, although you know me, I've always been an advocate of adding more wide receivers whenever the opportunity arises. But
just not
also,
Michael Bandy.
Just not Michael Bandy. Come on, man. The guy, talk about up and down. He's more up and down than the Buffalo Bills are right now. But Cody, I think that you look at this wide receiver group for the Broncos. Marvin Mims needs more targets, but you do have talent at the offensive skill positions, save for tight end right now, right? I mean, running back and receiver, you've got guys that you need to start getting going. We've seen glimpses of the brilliance of Courtland Sutton again. The 2019 Sutton is making a little comeback. Jerry Jeudy, the big play that he had against Kansas City and the touchdown. We've seen Javonte Williams playing well. Jaleel McLaughlin is playing really well. Marvin Mims is, when he's getting the ball like deep downfield, I mean, nobody's really more effective than he is right now. So I think you've got to believe in that, but it all hinges on whether or not, I guess, Russell Wilson can distribute those guys the ball. But the offensive line looks way better. Receivers look pretty good. Running backs look really good. I don't know. What are your thoughts offensively, Cody? Do you think that the Broncos are missing out on anything right now, or do you feel like, man, Sean Payton was right to stick with these guys?
I think the biggest thing is what you said, tight end. Like, tight end is the biggest positional concern on offense for me right now. In the passing game, like, Troutman is not a pass threat. Like, as a defensive coordinator, I'm not worried about 82. Now we have to be aware of the tight end screen, which they ran in the preseason, but they haven't really ran. I think they ran it week 1 against the Raiders, if I'm not mistaken, but they haven't really run that, right? And Troutman obviously was the beneficiary of that. Greg Dulcich is on IR. We don't even know if Dulcich is going to come back at all this season. So tight end would be the one position I'm concerned at. I love the point you made about Denver's offensive line. Now, I think pass protection, they've got to find that growth of consistency, right? Like they have games where they're good, then they have a game where it's like it's really bad. But I think overall, they've been the most consistent as run blockers, setting things up for Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin and even Samaje Perine. But more importantly, they're also allowing it to where Russell Wilson in pass protection situations, he's also using his legs, and that's good productive blocking and consistency as well, that he's able to take off and run. I mean, I think at this point, you can at least expect him to hit over 15 yards rushing in a single game. And to me, I think Denver's just going to have to find a way to gel on that a little bit more in pass protection. And I'm very, very curious. Like you mentioned, Marvin Mims it could be such a great dynamic here for the offense, but it's not going to come from the wide receiver screen. It's not going to come from the jet sweep or the reverse end around. It's going to come from taking a shot downfield to number 19, who did it twice against the Washington Commanders in week 2, 2 catches, $113. We haven't forgotten it, even though Sean Payton might have forgotten it. And then obviously that 49-yard catch against the Chicago Bears. If you get Marvin on the field and you get him downfield and you can get Russell Wilson to get him the football, I mean, Sayre, great things are going to happen for this offense. They'll be so much more, I'd say balanced, not one-dimensional sense as we have seen them. But now that they have the run game going, I really think play action has become a huge part of what they're going to do here in the second half of the season. And that's where your pass protection has to find that consistency. So for me, that would be probably my biggest area of analysis here for the offense and the evaluation of this roster moving forward. I mean, defensively, I think we already touched on it. I think that, Denver going with the youth movement at edge rusher, Jaquan stepping up at the nickel, PJ getting run at safety here. Denver obviously going with a veteran of Fabian Moreau, and they still have belief in Damari Mathis too. I think they're good on the defensive side. Like this is, I think, the best version of the defense you're going to get. They're getting the most out of their personnel here. So for me, I really don't have any complaints on the defensive side right now. Can they continue maintaining the high level of play that they've been at is a huge question. I'm curious about your thoughts, though. Is there anywhere on the defense where you're sitting there like, okay, hey, this might be something to watch here for the second half of the season?
I just think at cornerback, right? Obviously, with Fabian Moreau taking over Damari Mathis's spot, Riley Moss not really playing. That's really the one area of this defense that I would say long term or like longer term, not long term in terms of like 5 years plus, but like the next
I think
2
safety
to 3
too.
years. Safety, yeah, that could be as depending on what we see from PJ Locke, right, in these next, handful of weeks here, or if what happens when Kareem Jackson comes back as well. So I would say that cornerback position right now, outside of Jaquan McMillan and Pat Surtain, that's an area that I'm looking at to see in the second half of the season. Can Riley Moss get involved, or does Fabian Moreau really step up as a guy that the Broncos might say, hey, let's throw another 1-year offer at this guy or 2-year offer at this guy after the season because he played really well for us? Or does Damari Mathis get back in the lineup at some point? So as far as evaluating the roster, that's going to be a really interesting one. But you're most excited, of course, for that edge position, right? With Baron Browning and Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito. Those guys are getting after the quarterback. They're playing the run much better. I think you got, like you said, you got a good thing going defensively right now. Keep that momentum building. But in terms of the roster, I think you're slowly starting to see on both sides of the ball, maybe some foundational guys, as we had an episode a while back, like who is an actual core foundation piece of this roster. Maybe some guys emerging here in the second half to give the Broncos something to believe in and build on going forward.
No, I just think after this season, safety, like I think if they bring PJ and Justin back, and I think there's a chance they extend Justin Simmons this offseason. I think there's a really big possibility. Maybe even in season they look at doing that. They could. I mean, I feel good about those two guys, but it's just really behind those guys, right? Because I don't know if Kareem's going to play another year after this, right? I think he's been a good guy to have out there on the field, but I'm worried about the depth behind them. They obviously don't think that JL Skinner is anywhere close to being ready to even play special teams for them. That's concerning. Delarian Turner-Yell's playing pretty solid as a special teams guy, needs more work on the safety side, defense. That's an area maybe where I feel like, okay, hey, but I agree with you. Corner, want to say right here, and you heard it here on October 31st here on Halloween, is that keep an eye on undrafted rookie free agent on the practice squad. Art Green has gotten a lot of praise internally inside that building, has been a consistent guy that has helped them in practice on the practice squad. So something to keep an eye on here. Broncos Country, we want to know your thoughts on the state of the roster going forward in the second half of the season. Where are you concerned? Are you mad that they didn't make any moves at the trade deadline? Are you happy that they stood pat? Well, let us know if you're watching on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Sayre Bedinger and myself, we'll be back tomorrow as we begin to look at a first half of the season review. We're going to take a look at the Broncos offense. We're going to take a look at biggest surprises, where they could have been better, and what they can do going forward. We're going to get deeper to that in tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.